think the extent of the relationship with Epstein, the length of the relationship, the fact that Andrew has lied about how early it started, the closeness of the relationship that Sarah had with Epstein. There were more numbers for her in his book than for Andrew. And as you say, this gobsmacking sort of personal life that Andrew seems to have managed. So, yeah, I mean, someone very kindly said there was a headline on every page. And what's been nice is we've been able to run stories almost every day for the last week and a half, completely new stories, new stuff being picked up. And I'm keen, that I can update the book for the paperback and that maybe other people will come forward. But you've done some great work in this area, and I'm fascinated to hear what your take is on some of this.
Yeah, we've got a lot of overlap on some of the characters you've researched and some of the people I've interviewed over the years. And we will get to that because it's going to be fascinating to compare notes. So when you watched Prince Andrew on the BBC interview then, and he told us that he didn't sweat, that he doesn't go out in London in casual clothes, that, on and on and on and on it went, instantly rebutted on Twitter, a lot of it. I mean, what were you thinking? Was this a clash of the old world news control mechanisms versus modern technology?
Well, I mean, I did watch the interview in November 2019. At that point, I had no intention of writing about Andrew. I was still working on my book, Traitor King. But I did think, that he's crazy to have done this interview. And the more I discover about it, the crazier it was. I mean, it's an extraordinary story. I mean, one of the revelations is that Newsnight actually were only given this story 72 hours before transmission. The company that was really researching this was an offshoot based in Ireland of the BBC, the Panorama office. And they quietly got on with this away from any scrutiny from Portland Place. And actually, rather shockingly, the BBC were quite keen to shut them down. And the Palace actually were talking to lots of journalists about doing interviews. It wasn't something exclusive with Newsnight. They were looking for, I think, a soft interview. And I think they made the wrong call. They thought that Newsnight might do that. Panorama had a hard-hitting right to reply they wanted to put in. They had an interview with Jeffrey already. And I think the Palace were looking for any way to avoid talking to Panorama. So there's an interesting background to the famous interview. But that, of course, is a seminal point where, Andrew is basically finished.
So, let's go back then and look at some of the factors that led to his behavior. I mean, how far back did you go? Did you look at the psychology of his childhood?
Yes, I did. I mean, and you're absolutely right. The child is father of the man. We had exactly the character that we see now then. Very self-important, arrogant, pompous, entitled. There's a story I tell of him actually nicking someone's, at the age of 8, nicking someone's stamp collection and putting his name in it. The sense that, basically he can do what he wants. And of course, no boundaries, no one actually telling him this was wrong. And so in some ways he was, as people said to me, an accident waiting to happen.
So we've seen, kind of peculiar behavior coming from Prince Harry. Do you think that the pressure on the siblings when they're not, first in line to the throne, do you think that creates some kind of dysfunction in the siblings?
No, I don't. I mean, I think the extraordinary thing is, both Princess Anne, who was number 2, and Edward, who was number 4, they quietly got on with this, carving a role for themselves, doing their public duties, being very popular. So there's no reason why Andrew couldn't have done that. I mean, I think Charles felt that Andrew had every advantage. Charles's life was preordained. He couldn't actually really properly serve in the Navy. Andrew could do what he wanted, have the career he wanted, could go and chase women quite safely with no one reporting it. So he had every advantage and he threw it away.
So when did the women chasing begin?
Well, he was known as Randy Andy even at Gordonston. But again, one of the shocking things was to discover that he was sexually active even pre-teenage. At the age of 11, he's supposed to have lost his virginity. And this may explain the fact that he is such a sort of sex addict, because in some ways he's a sex victim. He actually was abused as a child. And that's come from a member of his staff. So, it does put him in a slightly more sympathetic light to understand his behavior, because, it is extraordinary, just how promiscuous he's been. And the fact that no one has come forward and no one has leaked stories, none of the press have run stories. I'm just amazed that this has now seemed to be news when so many people seem to know about it.
So what's the story of him losing his virginity at age 11?
Well, he's supposed to have been taken by the father of a friend to a brothel, which seems a strange thing for a friend's father to do. But, who knows what goes on in those circles.
Yeah, because I remember decades ago then, he was quite popular in the media. It was kind of like a male thing, Randy Andy. He's this dashing young man dating all of these model type women. And then you added the war hero story into it as well. His popularity seemed to be quite high during those years when I was younger. So was that a carefully cultivated trajectory of his image in the mainstream media back then?
Well, I do call it the rise and fall, and you're absolutely right. He was this very popular figure. He had an idea that he might actually be made regent, that Charles's marital problems would force him to step down, and he would stand in until William was of age. And, he was being pushed by the royal household to do trips because, he was wildly popular. It's hard to believe now, and hard to believe that Charles would say to Diana, why can't you be more like Sarah Ferguson? Because the two have sort of fallen so far from grace. But yeah, they were initially very popular. People felt they were a breath of fresh air. They seemed very natural and normal. And it's sad to see what has happened. But I think, Sarah Ferguson, basically, Paul Boyle says, went into the sweetie shop and went wild. And we can chart that. That's the advantage of the biography. We can chart that transition from this very normal middle-class woman who suddenly gets airs and graces when she gets into the royal family. And I think the poor pressure put on Andrew with this woman who was, a real spendthrift, and was forcing him to, get involved with people like Epstein to raise money to pay her debts.